maybe, actually, the attitudes have gone backwards. There is still a hardcore of misogyny there that, guys, we don't want a woman in charge, so get out and vote for Donald Trump.
It's interesting you chose that film. What I had in mind was, you might remember the Fast Show sketch with Mr. Chumley Warner, where they were encouraging the women around the table to only talk of, what was it, fluffy kittens and not the guilt, the guilt market or whatever it was. But yeah, there's shades of that going on, isn't there? We're joined by Erol Morkoc, Republican strategist and spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. Erol, hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Erol, full disclosure, I normally present at 1:00 in the afternoon, which is why I keep saying good afternoon to everybody. And you're not even in the US, I don't think, are you? So that makes it valid. Anyway, whatever time it is, what are you kind of feeling out here from what we know so far?
Well, look, at first glance, you don't want to jinx anything, but it looks great. And, right about now, like last election, we were looking at much different metrics in places like Georgia, with early voting, with the low propensity voters. I kind of hate that term, but it is a real thing. And, we kind of have this amazing new thing, which is a male voting block. Never really was a thing before, because men were kind of split 50-50 effectively. So to be an effective block, you need to be broken up, say 60-40 or some degree. So, I'm 34 years old. It's the first time in my election that the male vote has been a card to play. So all of these things together, again, we're very early, but it looks very good. And I think everybody's pretty excited and eager to see how it plays out.
It looks good in what sense? Where are you landing when you say it looks good? Because it is very early days, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super early. Let's look at some of the more niche data, right? Which at least we can pull from. Trump's doing very well with black men. And he's also doing very well with black women. Now, just like look at the data. Kamala Harris is about 89% with black women. Joe Biden was at 95%. And Trump is up around a quarter with black men, around 25%. So these tight voting blocks, especially in places like Georgia and Pennsylvania, these numbers are small, but they make a difference. And another thing I'd like to point out is the Amish vote and the Mennonite vote. These are people who are unpollable, but there are tens of thousands of them across Pennsylvania and in Ohio. And these people are coming out to the polls. And then the other thing to look at, I think, that's critical for the viewers or listeners to the show is we really crushed it in voter registrations in the last 2 years. We've out-hustled the ground game of the Democrats, who have much more funding and traditional ground game. But as far as new voters on the voters' rolls, those are our voters, and we're very excited about that. And we look at all of this. We look at the early sort of turnout being kind of how we hoped, and we're trying to be positive.
And what's behind the Amish?
It's really interesting.
Do you think? Is it? Sorry, John. Just on that Amish point.
Yeah, no.
Is that just, as you might imagine, conservative, small c, therefore Trump?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We definitely. The Amish have come out, and you can go and see on social media. Granted, it's not them posting it, but people asking them questions. And the Amish are kind of all for Trump. Trump's, about small government and individual rights, and the Amish are very big on that, especially with things like their dairy production and other, bellwether issues for the Amish community. And Trump can speak to them in a way that they maybe never have been spoken to, as they've never really turned up like they are today. And right about now, we're about to, bring this home.
You talked about him being for individual rights. Not if you're a woman and you want to have an abortion. Women have lost that right. And I just wonder whether you think that is going to cost you in this election, as women kind of feel more motivated to vote because of that.
Well, of course, we don't want to mislead anybody listening to think that women have lost the right to vote because of Donald Trump. Women have not lost the right to vote.
I didn't say lost the right to choose over abortion.
No, they have not. The states will decide as pursuant to the laws. More importantly, he's never put a federal abortion ban. He does not back that. We would love to have a European system, 12 weeks, exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother. So Donald Trump's a very progressive guy on abortion. To castigate him as an anti-abortion person just because the Supreme Court revoked Roe v. Wade, which is not how you have laws, by the way. The legislative branch doesn't make laws. So everybody, including Justice Ginsburg, knew that you had to codify it into law. So now it's gone through the proper process, and Donald Trump, he's taken a lot of flack for it, but he's definitely not an anti-abortion person at all, and you can hear it from his own statements. He's been a registered Democrat since 2008.
Hang on. Sorry, he appointed 3 Supreme Court justices during his presidency, Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, etc., and they were the people that overturned Roe versus Wade, and Donald Trump took a victory lap.
But you're assuming that overturning Roe v. Wade bans abortion. That's not what it is. It means that the federal government, through the Supreme
means that
Court,
a woman has not got the. It's up to the individual states to decide what laws it wants, and some of them, like Iowa, have introduced really, really restrictive laws, which means that a women do not have a right to choose in the way that they did when Roe versus Wade was in place.
And that would be great to codify something into national law, as opposed to doing what Justice Ginsburg and everybody else knew was the only way to Trojan horse this to the point we are now. Nobody believes that Roe v. Wade was abortion. Roe v. Wade was the government ensuing to get past a very conservative Christian country at the time. Now we're at a progressive time. It's time to codify it into law. And Donald Trump is not going to sign an abortion ban whatsoever. That's not his policy. And we would love to have the states have the rights that they're supposed to have. Each state has its own rights in this country, and we certainly respect that.
Errol, can I ask you on that point of, let's focus in on states where it is essentially a ban after 6 weeks, which is probably the earliest you could know you were pregnant or think you were pregnant. Let's set aside the ethical, just for a moment, set aside the ethical question of aborting a child simply because it's inconvenient to you and you don't want it. We have heard...
Well, that's a huge ethical question to set aside.
Well, of course it is. I'm setting aside... It absolutely is. Which is why I'm making it clear it's an ethical question. But I want to ask you about something very specific, which is a kind of upshot of these laws, which is women who very much want their babies and find that they have an ectopic pregnancy, or find that they have a septic pregnancy, or find that they have preeclampsia to an extremely dangerous degree that could and probably will, if left, become a septic pregnancy that will kill both mother and baby if unattended to. We've heard account after account from women saying that they experienced either a serious, sometimes deadly delay, or we've heard from their families, deadly delay in care, or a failure to receive care at all because doctors were either rejecting them, perhaps on ethical grounds, or were too terrified to touch them as a patient and deal with them as a patient for fear of being described as an abortionist. That's not healthy.
Well, certainly the way you described it, that sounds awful, and that sounds like it falls right under the category of life of the mother. Right, and that's something that should be codified into law, and Donald Trump supports codifying.
And when doctors say to women that there is still a heartbeat, even though all clinical evidence points to a septic pregnancy killing the mother if she's left, and certainly killing the child in the end?
And you want me to remove ethics from that answer?
No, not at all. What I'm saying is, it is the upshot of it. If the unwanted element of pregnancy is the central question of the ethics, do you have no care at all for the women who very much want their child but find themselves in these clinical situations? It matters, and women die when it's not handled well. And if it's not handled well out of fear of being called an abortionist, the changes aren't working.
Well, then certainly if these are the things that are issues in states, which it sounds like they are, and it sounds very serious, these are things that should be put into law. It sounds like a failing of the very first iteration of certain states. But the majority of states, take Kansas, for example, a very red state, kept the very progressive abortion laws. The very hardcore anti-abortion crusaders, while we respect their rights, they don't lead the party, and that's definitely not the perspective of Donald Trump. And it's up to the states, especially, to protect those women. What you've described is awful, and that's not what we would stand for abrogating whatsoever.
And if it continues to happen, even if it continues to happen to a relatively small number of women, it's just collateral damage of these legal changes?
The collateral damage, you could say the collateral damage that had a lot of babies that were aborted that could have lived also. Then you'd say, collateral damage for legal changes, now we have abortions and we didn't. Roe v. Wade, so how many babies were aborted in the last 50 years? Was that collateral damage for women's rights? It's a slippery slope, and it's an ethical question, and I think it's too much for this program to tackle right now.
Because?
Well, because if you want to have an ethical discussion about it, this would go on for hours. If you're arguing that bodies on both sides are collateral damage, I mean, that's an ethical debate. And I absolutely agree that, having any sort of social functionalist change or constructionist change is going to have gaps in it. So if I would concede that there's definitely anything with change is going to have detrimental effects, especially to vulnerable people, the same way that vulnerable babies have been aborted in America in a very progressive pro-abortion stance, by the way, led by Margaret Sanger, who is a white supremacist eugenicist. And there's a lot of history of abortion in America that has a negative connotation. And those babies were also collateral damage. And there's a pro-life movement in America, and a lot of Americans who really believe in protecting the life of the unborn baby. And that's a human issue. That's not a woman's issue. That's men and women. We were all born, right?
Okay, yes, we were all born. Erol Morkoc, thank you. Let me bring in John Scardino to respond to some of that. We'll talk about other issues as well. But John Scardino, spokesperson for Democrats Abroad, joining us live from a watch party in London. That's what you can hear in the background. Some thoughts on what you just heard?
Well, I have to say, although some of that I had some trouble hearing because of all the enthusiasm here at our watch party in London with Democrats Abroad, it sounded like a lot of crazy talk from the Republican side. So I'm at a little bit of a loss to elaborate further, because that was quite a long conversation. It sounded like we got into, and the details of which, because of the noise here, I'm sorry I couldn't comment on a lot of that.
Well, tell me, look, so far we're seeing, I mean, again, we have to say early days, but we're seeing some positive indications for Donald Trump in places like Georgia. We're going to get Florida. Florida is closing in this hour as we speak. What are you concluding from what you're seeing so far, or starting